All right, it's 1:05. Thank you everyone for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time to learn more about the outdoor recreation adoption model. Today we are hosting Matt Dunfee, and it is our pleasure to have him as a guest. Matt will be talking about the outdoor recreation adoption model, and he brings to the table more than 10 years, I bet, of experience working on R3 matters. Many of you have interacted with him in other capacities, so you know that this will be a great presentation. Without further ado, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat box on the lower right-hand part of your screen. We will also be posting a survey there at the end of the webinar, and you'll be able to find a copy of this webinar online on the R3 website by the end of the week. So Matt, if you'll please start the webinar, we appreciate it.
Hello, everybody. This is Matt Dunfee with the Wildlife Management Institute. I want to take some time today and talk about the outdoor recreation adoption model. It's something that in the world of hunter or angler recruitment, retention, reactivation, we've been discussing for quite a while. So today we want to give you a brief overview of what the model is and what it means. Before we get into it, a little bit of history. I think it's important to point out that neither I nor anybody that worked on these recent R3 projects invented this idea. This idea actually stretches back to 1955 and probably even previous to that. But a professor of rural psychology by the name of Everett Rogers developed this idea called the diffusion of innovations theory, which sounds complicated, but simply put, defines the steps that people or groups of people go through to adopt a new activity or a new idea. And his original concept really revolved around groups of people, particularly social structures that accept new ideas. And then as time went on, a lot of other sociologists looked at this concept and continued to develop it. And in the early 80s, Dan Decker at Cornell really applied this thinking to the process individuals go through to become a hunter. It was one of the first times that this idea was specifically applied to outdoor recreation. And then subsequent authors, subsequent projects, including work done by the National Shooting Sports Foundation, continued to refine this idea, apply it to hunter education, and really move it down to the point where it began to describe the steps an individual goes through to adopt hunting as an activity or another outdoor recreation pursuit as an activity. And that individual focus is really where we pick up on this most recent iteration of this model. Although a lot of these concepts do tie to groups, particularly social groups and social constructs, it's very useful to think about these in terms of what an individual goes through to become a hunter or to adopt an outdoor recreation activity, because if we understand that individual process, we can better develop and implement programs or efforts that help people down that process. So what I'm about to show you today really came out of a project that the Wildlife Management Institute spearheaded about 5 years ago to get our heads wrapped around what was happening with hunter recruitment, retention, and reactivation. I want to give a lot of credit to Bob Byrne, who's now with Bob Byrne Consulting. He and I sort of brainstormed this current iteration of it, and I'll share with you some of the basic ideas of what makes it work. So let's start with looking at really the first step of an individual's, let's say, natural pathway to becoming a hunter. And if you imagine an individual who has not hunted before, the first stage they're really in as it relates to their future participation in hunting is awareness of this activity. Now, here in the United States, probably everybody is aware of hunting in some form or another, but this awareness is more personal. This is a kind of awareness where the individual really considers, is this an activity that is relevant to my life? With some demographics, it's even, is this an activity that is relevant to my social group or my family structure? And that awareness, if cultivated by either conversations or external inputs, hopefully can evolve into an interest where the individual starts to internalize the idea of hunting even more, and it becomes more than just an abstract thought or just an abstract conception of, yes, there's this thing out there called hunting, and more of, this may be something I want to look into for myself a little bit more. If that interest is piqued, and very specifically, if the motivations, the personal motivations of the individual are increased in that interest, they will eventually want to do something about it, or we hope that they want to do something about it. And in the case of hunting, they need to try it. Now, this is a critical point that defines hunting from other activities like angling, and that hunting isn't easily done on a weekend on a whim. This is something that takes some time and planning. So it's important to note that with hunting, the interest phase is probably longer and probably more involved than, say, the interest stage for someone becoming an angler. Angling, like some other outdoor activities like biking or hiking, doesn't have quite as many skills as the skills required to become a hunter. So in that interest stage, before the trial stage, it's sometimes easier to get those individuals to try the activity, whereas in hunting, there's probably a lot we need to consider before the individual actually tries it. And this is a good strategic point to think about for those developing hunter R3 programs. It's not just as easy as asking somebody out on the next upcoming weekend. This takes some time to plan. But if that interest has been piqued and the skills and knowledge have been learned to go hunting and the individual's motivations have been aligned, they'll go and try it. Now, this is the first time that this individual will have personal experience that will back up all of their preconceptions. And that personal experience, the actual first time they try hunting, will bring about a very important decision. And it's that decision to continue. Once they know what it looks and sounds and smells and feels like, that decision becomes very real. And it's probably a binary. It's, yes, this is something I want to do again, even though I might need more help, or no, this is something I don't want to participate again. Okay, once that decision is made, the next stage, we call continuation with support. Others call just simply recruitment and adoption. Whatever it is, this thing is now something they're going to do. And they're going to continue it. But they will be nowhere near competency. And this is probably the most fragile step of this entire process. Now listen to me on this, folks. This is the most fragile step because all of their sociological underpinnings, their self-identification is on the line here. They're doing something new, and that's scary. And particularly if they come from a background or a social group that this activity is not common within, they're bucking the system. And as a culture, we are increasingly encouraged to not buck the system. We are increasingly encouraged to stay within your group, find your social core, find your people and stay with them. Segment into subgroups of your social group, because your identity lies in what your people do. And what we're saying is, no, your identity lies in what you do. So if social support and continued opportunity for learning and gaining skills, competency, and confidence is not there, it is highly probable that the individual will desert. As a matter of fact, some of the early researchers in the 80s on this model, when they adopted the original diffusions of innovation theory, one of the first corrections they made to it is they said, in reality, I'm trying to think of the term they used. It wasn't diversion, but basically, not adopting the activity was more likely than adopting the activity. In other words, you're going to lose more people than you will gain people moving through this process because it's just scary to do things new. Now, as many of you have heard me say before, this step, when we look nationally at a lot of our efforts, our R3 efforts, this is where we most frequently drop people. This is where we have not put much of our time and energy. We have not explored ways to hook them up with mentors extensively, or we have not explored ways to create self-learning tools or social support building platforms for them. And we need to be doing a whole lot more of that. Okay, moving on here. I want to bust through this so we have some more time for questions. So let me wrap this up because we're in sort of the last stages here. Now, a lot of the early models kind of stopped at the adoption stage. Bob Byrne and I, based on work that Phil Sang did with DJ Case and NSSF produced in their best practices manual, we threw in these 2 steps, which they did as well, because I think it's important. The continuation without support stage, that's the stage that your avids are in. The people that we are really trying to create, or let me say this more accurately, the people that have the behavior that we're most interested in. These folks are going to read their own regulations, they're going to watch their own TV shows, they're going to talk to their own friends, they're going to tell their own stories. That's where we want to get. But there are 2 steps in that group that I want to point out here. Then this wasn't really heavily documented in previous models. This was an addition that we put in there. The lapsing and reactivation. Now, I think there's a perception out there. This is important, so pay attention to this. I think there's a perception out there that lapse and reactivate are things that happen after continuation without support. That is wrong. Lapsing and reactivation are a dynamic process that happens within the continuation without support stage. I would even argue the lapsing and reactivation is a dynamic process within the continuation with support and the continuation without support. It can always happen, and we always have a probability to work to think about. Now, there's roughly 2 categories of lapsing. Short-term lapsing, like I moved, or I had a kid, I just got married, I didn't get out there this year, but I'm gonna get out there next year. Or I'm building preference points for an elk hunt in Wyoming. That's short-term lapse. We should address that, but that's easy. It's a lot easier to address, likely. Probably messaging and things, reminders, license renewals, advertising, or just images of cooked game or cookbooks. Those things help with that light lapsing. The long-term lapsing is when a significant life change has occurred. And it could be something like a move, or having a kid, or going to college, or getting your first job. Life changes so much you just have to reprioritize. That person will likely need a little bit more in terms of motivation manipulation or motivation alignment to get them involved. But that lapsing and reactivation is a dynamic process within those other steps. We've talked about the critical nature of this decision to continue. We've used it to do the following, and you guys have seen this. That decision to continue really breaks recruitment and retention, and that's something new that wasn't provided in this model before. We think it's accurate. It seems to be accurate. Now, why do we break it up into recruitment, retention, reactivation? Well, because it simply provides us a way to think about broadly these processes that are happening and tailor our programs and efforts to make sure we're addressing those processes. Okay, a couple more things and we'll wrap this up. I really wish I was better at building models. I suck at it, at least graphically, because I wish there was some better way I could show how important this social support construct is. I'll reference what I said in the beginning. The whole underpinnings of this theory, and I'm going to move past a theory. This is a truth of human dynamics. It starts within how cohorts of social groups accept an activity. What that should tell you, folks, is people are not lone wolves inherently. We are pack animals, and we think in packs. And we can segment our packs into early adopters, late adopters, and even those that just refuse to adopt. We work individually, but we work like a colony of bacteria. Our best work is done when we're in a group. So the underpinnings of the model are social in nature. Even though there's an individual process, that individual process is a function of a group process. There is only a very small amount of narcissistic rear ends out there who will do things individually on their own. Almost everybody else does it with their people. Their people could be only one other individual. Their people could be 20 other individuals. But that's how we do things. So if we dismiss this as something we simply can't, we can't do that, so we're not going to focus effort on it, we are going to lose massive amounts of our efficiency. I'm not saying you have to create the social world, but you have to make sure one exists to point that person to. And I do believe in some contexts, actually in a lot of contexts, we can facilitate this simply by making sure people start communicating with each other. There's a lot of innovative ideas out there, but this aspect of social support the construct of the social milieu has to be in place for every step of this model. Then finally, the self-identification. All early iterations that led to this current model talk about an individual self-identification which is based on past experience melded with future experiences and the biases that they have. If we recognize that this is what we're trying to create, and as I alluded to in the trial stage, we build time in our programs or our efforts to facilitate that person going, hey, this is me, we're going to increase the impact of our efforts long term. Okay. I have talked probably way too much. Marty told me to talk 20 minutes. I've talked a little bit over that. So what I think I'd like to do now is open it up for questions, largely because everybody on the phone has heard this model before, and you've probably been struggling with some individual issues of applying this to your organization or your individual program. So I will kick it back to Marty and or Sam to ask the questions that may have been posed.
Great, yeah. So, Matt, yesterday you showed me and Sam that you further add on some of these programs into your model. Do you mind, while people think of questions, just kind of showing people that and how maybe they could use that to break down their own programs within their agency?
Yeah, I will fire up Marty right now. And you guys will see a little bit behind the door of the model building software that I use here.
So I guess what are you doing here? Kind of give the basic overview of what's going on here.
So I'm sharing a little work that we recently did with the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, and there might be some of those folks on the call right now. Several of you have seen me do this before, but we did it at a national level. So after exhaustive literature reviews and a lot of work from a agency staff working group, we made program categories of angler R3 efforts that are out there. And then what we did is we used this adoption process to sort of map the influence of those programs. So basically what it means, if you look at this top one up here, basic angling skills training with fishing, that's a category of program. Basically what it means is you get people in a room, you teach them about tying knots a little bit, you teach them how to cast, and then you actually take them out on the water. It might be one day, it might be over 2 days. But essentially, what the reach of that program on the individual going through the program, according to the steps of this process, is probably start somewhere in awareness. That program could take somebody in awareness and push them through interest and give them the first trial. And if we think about their social group, maybe push them through that decision to continue. So we can take a program type, or even an individual program, or a marketing effort, or an electronic self-learning tool, and say, how much are we really influencing the individual or social group's process with this tool or with this program? Now, from that point, there's a lot of things we can do with it. The first thing I would challenge everybody is be honest with how much your program is actually doing. For instance, if we look at this basic angling skills training with fishing, if we make this just open to the public and we don't invite a target audience that we know is in the early awareness or interest stages, I can tell you what probably is going to happen. The reason I can tell you this is because we've done some studies of these programs. You end up selecting for people who simply like doing something that is scheduled on a community calendar. They're not vested in fishing long term. All they heard was that, hey, 2 weeks from now on a Saturday, there's a free lunch provided by the Fish and Wildlife Agency, and they have all the gear, and we can go catch stock trout in this pond. That sounds like a blast. But that is a person that is not really on the adoption process. That's someone who's looking for a scheduled event. And we've asked folks like that after these events, and we've asked them, hey, did you have a good time? Yes. Did you catch fish? Yes. Would you be willing to do this again? Absolutely. Then we ask them the kicker. How likely is it that you will take your family fishing on your own in the future? Most of them said, Not at all likely. When we asked him why, well, because the reason we attended this is because it was on the calendar and you guys provided everything for us. So the adoption model can be very useful if we're honest with our program and we really quickly look at the stages that it might be affecting. And then we can map out, as we did with the rest of these programs, where they actually fit. Once we've done that, we can think about extending the reach of programs. For instance, if we do this basic angling skills training with fishing, and we know that we stop right here at this continuation with support stage, which, if you remember, I said is one of the more delicate stages, it leaves people there. But what if we took this program, Advanced Angling Skills Training, and moved a cohort from Program A through Program B? Then we've just extended the reach of our efforts and pushed people farther down that process than we would have before. So it's one of many ways we can think about this strategically for programs as well as individually.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's really helpful to visualize on this kind of roadmap where all the programs fall and whatnot. So Werner Bars has a question. How do we share what we are doing to leverage off each other's programs? Example, Savannah National Wildlife Refuge has an intro to turkey hunt for youth. We want to find out who else in the area is doing similar hunt programs so we can provide that info to all our participants as a place to continue with support after our event. So It sounds like he's asking for maybe like a place to send attendees where they can find more stuff going on in their area that they can kind of further push themselves down this model.
Right, and this is a great question, Werner, and several folks are grappling with it. So, number one, you get your stakeholders in your state together in a room, and you run them through this, and everybody, rah, hey, we get it, we want to start linking our programs together. And they go home, and then they realize, well, how the heck are we going to do that? Because maybe we can't share our participants' information. Maybe if we're a big national organization, we don't want to share our participants' information. And how do we know how to do that? Even if we were willing to share information. Okay, so a couple ways, rather than me saying here's what I think you should do. Here's a couple ways the states have gone about doing this. One is they form a stakeholder, an R3 stakeholder working group within an agency or within some a cohort of agencies. All right, and those folks build a calendar. Folks have used Google Calendars in the past. Some have used other third-party software. They build a public calendar and they work to strategically, as a team, align their events so that people who go to a fishing program in the summer can see, hey, 2 months later, there's this Learn How to Go Rabbit Hunting seminar that the DNR is putting on. And then after that, Pheasants Forever is going to put on a trial shooting event and pheasant hunt. So step one is a calendar. Step two is something that marketers use that we do not use. And this goes to, well, how do you remind those people that there's a calendar out there and remind them that next steps are there? The answer is, well, you email them. Well, the rebuttal is we can't share our participants' information. And here's my very clear response to that. Yes, you can. They do it all the time everywhere in the world now. And emails are being hung on to more than they have in the past. Iowa recently did a study with hunter education graduates and found that even after, I think it was 4 years, when they scrubbed the email addresses of their past participants, only 13% of the email addresses were invalid anymore. So people are hanging on to these. And how do you get around the data sharing aspect? At the end of your event, you have some way that individuals can check a box either through registration or through a website, or they can access with a QR code on a poster at your event, and you ask the question, would you like to receive more information about fishing, or would you like to learn other outdoor skills? Click here. Once they click that box, They have given you and your partner organizations permission to email them with using things like Constant Contact, other email marketing tools out there to remind them, hey, this is coming up, this thing is happening. And those agencies that are doing that kind of two-pronged strategy, let's make a public calendar and let's start reminding people of the things that are coming up, they're seeing lift. People are responding to that. So that's how it has been done, and that's where the innovations are starting to come out.
Great. So from Mark Norquist, Matt, do you believe there should be more emphasis on social acceptance or appreciation than skill learning when it comes to the programs trying to address the early stages of adoption?
Great question, Mark. Based on, I'm going to answer this one a little bit academically, because that's what's formed my opinion. You can't change public opinion very easily. It's big. And when it comes to hunting and fishing, my feeling is national campaigns to change public opinion are probably beyond our resources. So what my focus is that individuals form opinions based on the social group they're in or what is most popular. Their opinions are a product of a combination of their values and their experiences. The values plus experience equals behavior. You can't change value, you can't change values and you can't change experiences, but you can change behaviors. So what I would answer yes to in your question is that in the awareness and interest stages, we need to address the cultural influences on a person's behaviors, but acknowledge that those cultural influences may not actually be aligned with their motivations. And to give you an example that's relevant to, I know, your world, Mark, when we think about locavores, what we find is a lot of these people were heavily biased against hunting because their social group tends to be biased against hunting, but their actual internal values, which were forged by the time they were 8 years old, put a high premium on local sustainability, local protein, and sharing experiences with their kids and their families. If we spend time to say, hey, do you know that you're kind of being lied to and that your individual values, things like local food, sustainability, those align perfectly with hunting. For adults specifically, we do need to make time to sort of reveal their own values and motivations and their alignments with hunting, and give them a little bit of time to get over everything they've been told in their social groups.
Okay, great. Jamie Cook wants to know, where are other states in regards to mobilizing their hunters and anglers into quality mentors that get the long-term investment? Examples range from an eHarmony for new hunters and mentors to incentives geared towards mentors.
Jamie, thank you for bringing that up. I really wish I could work on this more. That's the kind of stuff I wanted to do until I kind of recognized that our profession, we needed more professional resources and training to think about this problem. But the audience that has not been touched with this R3 talk are current hunters and anglers. And to pull back on a quote from Goodwill Hunting, it's not our fault. So this situation that we're in, from an agency and organization perspective, this is not all our fault. It's very little our fault. We're trying to be artificial surrogates of a natural mentorship process. Hunters and anglers somewhere along the way lost it. And it's their fault, and I'm one of those theirs, by the way. I'm putting myself in that category. They did not recognize what was happening to their sport, and they hung on to, and are still hanging on to, their traditional values, their political, religious, social, geographic biases, and are saying, if you don't look like us, sound like us, talk like us, you can't be a hunter and angler. And we gotta stop that. So what you're talking about is honestly the easiest way Based on all this research we talked about, the easiest way to make a hunter and angler is to have a mentor, without question. Someone who can facilitate an individual through all the stages of adoption and provide a social support system for that individual. So your question was specifically how far along are states and organizations in doing this? Not very far, because they're trying to get their own houses in order. They're trying to just ramp up their R3 efforts and recognize that R3 is a part of public engagement. So they're trying rapidly to get their capacity built up. But I believe this is the next frontier in R3. If we can educate current hunters and anglers and say, there are so many more people who want to stand beside you in the field, and if you're going to mentor somebody, or not even mentor someone, there's so many people that want to stand behind you in the field, and you are not allowed to leave the field. You are not allowed to hang your boots up until you have made sure that someone is going to at least replace your boots in the field down the road. So this is an area where I think we need a lot of innovation. I know Powderhook is working on sort of a way to do digital mentoring. Your idea of eHarmony, I've thought about that for quite a while. It's like it's a match.com for hunters. Particularly for adults, if someone just got involved into hunting or angling but they have some questions or they want to mentor, it would be great if we had a network that could hook them up. I would love to see more of these ideas tried and figured out. Thus far, there hasn't been a ton of focus, but as I said before, my hope is really there. If we can go there down the road, I think we can turn this needle a whole lot faster.
Yeah, great. So Brian Guzman asked, based on the age of NASP students, can we ask for email addresses as we are building our information database? He wants to know if it's socially and culturally appropriate to ask for email addresses of someone under the age of 18.
Yeah, I would say even above socially and culturally acceptable, in some places it's just not legal. So the general advice there is ask for their parents, or an open-ended question: how may we contact you again? And sort of, if you don't have any laws that prohibit you from using an email address of an 18-year-old, then go ahead and do it. But in many cases, it is against the law. So ask for a parent, or simply ask, how may we contact you? And frequently, they'll put, the parents are the ones who fill those forms out anyhow, and they'll put down a phone number or email address. If you're cautious at all, I would just say go through the parents, and then tell the kids, we're going to be sending your parents some more information, and then usually they can be the prod that gets that email to them. At this point, it's more of a legal issue than it is even a cultural issue.
Okay, great. Brenda Beckley wants to know, are states seeing that mobilizing hunters, anglers to work independently from the state fish and game very difficult? With lots of effort here in Idaho, volume is low. NGOs do not have the resources or firearms and the liability coverage for these events.
Yeah. Read the first part of that question again, Marty.
Are states seeing that mobilizing hunters and anglers to work independently from the state fish and game very difficult?
Yeah. So, Brenda, this kind of goes back to that first thing I was saying, is that we haven't done much on this. So there are a few states who have tried mentor programs. I think there are a few more in the works, and as I said, I think that's an area that we're going to see increased innovation on. The capacity issue that you're talking about is a very real one. How many can we actually make through our individual efforts, and would we be better served mobilizing and training current hunters and anglers on how to mentor, how to reach out? Producing an idea that I heard from one state is, could we produce a handbook that we hand out to all of our hunters and anglers that come into our offices to buy a license, say, here's how to mentor, and by the way, here are the age groups and demographics that really need mentors. That stuff I think needs to be done. The liability issue of an agency or an organization providing firearms, that's interesting. That's all over the board. Some states can actually do it. They can loan out firearms
for first-time hunters. It's from a state like Colorado. They just went through a bunch of gun control legislation. That is crazy talk to me. But if your state allows it, go ahead and do it. I have heard some concern about if we as an agency recommend one of our participants to a mentor and that mentor provides firearms, are we liable? As of yet, I haven't heard where you are liable. I think that probably needs a little bit more exploration to make sure that's the case. But in most ways, saying, hey, here's a database of people who would be willing to mentor. You can contact them if you'd like. As far as I know, that isn't a lot. That wouldn't make the agency liable.
Okay, great. Susan wants to know, at the end of your presentation, when you open the Mirati app, you both increasing access and train the trainer programs span the entire model. Why is that?
Great question, Susan. I don't think it should. So, welcome to consensus building or actionable alignment. There's with all models are wrong. Some are useful. The idea here is that there are some effort types, and this, let me just do this to blow your mind. Okay, if you look at all the brown bars right there, the reason those are brown is because the working group that I worked with, as well in conjunction with the research that we did, separated out things that are true R3 programs versus things that can be used as R3 if they are targeted. For instance, let's look at the first one, stocking programs. Is a stocking program in general an R3 tool? No, that is not its ultimate goal or outcome. It isn't. Can stocking be used as an R3 tool? You're darn right it can. If you're going to have a basic skills training event with fishing, stock the hell out of that pond before you get people there. There's research that shows, particularly with fishing, not necessarily with hunting, but with fishing, catching a fish increases the individual self-identification, their confidence, as well as a thing called mutual self-revelation within their social group, a shared experience that they can go back to somebody with and say, hey, remember that time I caught that fish? So inherently it isn't R3, but it could be used essentially anywhere along this process if it's strategically done. Another example would be reactivation for, let's say, veterans, disabled veterans coming back. Stock a pond before you take them out there. Make sure, again, they're catching fish, so they have a shared experience with their comrades, and you build a social support group. So you could use it as a reactivation tool as well. The same is true with all those. And those two green bars up there, that was a compromise on our part to say these things are a little bit more R3-y. They're not specifically R3 programs because, let's say, a train the trainer. Your goal with a train the trainer program is to train the trainers. That's your ultimate outcome. Your ultimate outcome isn't to make an angler. But once trainers are trained, then the trainers could go and implement recruitment, retention, or reactivation programs anywhere along that process. So it's a way to basically graphically show some R3 efforts are specifically designed for very certain to move people through very specific stages of the adoption sequence. Other things might be used for recruitment, retention, or reactivation, but, and then here's the big but, this is the takeaway here, they have to be targeted for that purpose in order to be considered R3.
Okay, Werner has another question. He wants to know if calling them mentors or coach is better. One is better than the other. He wants to know if, would hunters more likely participate in mentorship if they were called a coach, or do they like the word mentor? In your past, what do you think you've seen?
Nice job, Werner. This one surprised me. There actually is a selection bias on this one. The term mentoring is very value-laden, and mentoring, what I have found, and what states have found, I should say not I, but states who have told me about this, when they have used the term mentoring to their volunteers, when those volunteers hear something like Boys and Girls Club, so multiple year, heavy interactions, long time commitment. So I think we should avoid that term as best we can, unless we're actually talking about long-term multiple interaction type mentoring. There could be, and I remember I talked with Eric Dinger at Powderhook about this. Can we come up with classification systems like, light mentors, medium mentors, heavy mentors? I don't know what the terms are, but I think we do need to invent. This is where the marketers could come in handy, by the way. We all need your help because we're biologists and we suck at this stuff. It would be great to come up with terms that accurately describe the type of resources out there, because we need a suite of resources. A lot of people, particularly adults, they don't necessarily need a one-on-one person to go with them. They just need someone to call when they're confused about what ammunition to buy. They just need someone to talk to say, hey, what's a good cookbook I can use? So what do we call that versus somebody that, maybe takes somebody scouting and that's all that they need, versus someone that actually takes someone out hunting? I think we need to invent those terms, and we haven't as a community. But you're right. Let's be cautious about using the term mentor because it's very value laden.
Okay, great. Yeah. So kind of wrapping some of this up, Sam wants to know, Matt, if people feel they have a good handle on this concept, what are some of the next topics they should look into? And, what are some of the next steps that they can start taking? Would filling out one of these models be beneficial for them, or what should they do after listening to this webinar?
Yeah. What the heck do you do with this model? It's a great question. Well, there's a lot that you can do with this model. And I know that's no answer at all. So let me give you a couple steps. It depends on where you or your organization is at. And the first step should be what I call getting your house in order. As an organization, map all your programs on this model, just like we've done here. That's step one. Know what you're doing and be really honest to find what are we really impacting. This particular map shows a lot of diversity across the board, but I can tell you nationally, almost all of our efforts, particularly on the hunting side, line up under recruitment. Go through that and document what the heck it is you're doing, and really how far are you pushing the envelope? How many stages are you really pushing people through? Not how many stages you might push people through, how much are you doing? Second step is do it with your partners as well, so that you can produce sort of a overall adoption model map, program map, to see where are we as a state, where are we as a city, where are we as a multi-organization working group on doing our three. So you can be kind of a visual gap analysis. Where do we need more work? Where do we have a bunch of redundant programs? Where are there opportunities for us to link to programs so that one cohort of people that go through one program can move seamlessly right into the next? So use it strategically like that. That's step number one. Step number two, it's not even step. Option number two, use it to design better programs. Now, let me make a nuanced point here I didn't make before. Let me go back to this one. Let me start this from the arrows right here between the boxes. That's where programs or R3 efforts or marketing strategies sit. Our programs are here. Our programs are the arrows. So look at your organization's resources and know that you cannot do everything. No way. Bruce Mathers talks about this in the paper I'm sending you guys. Every other researcher going back into the 80s talks about this. This is impossible for one organization to do. This requires a community to do. So, if you're going to build new programs, what are you best at? Are you best at pushing people from here to here? If so, own that and do it well. Don't try to build a poor program that does too many things. Better to build one program right here and then find a partner who has a darn good program right here and say, hey, let's join forces to give a diversity of experiences. So use it to really identify where we need to go. If you decide this is where we need a program, research the people here in the awareness stage and say, what do they need to move them to here? Use it to build a better program by recognizing people have to move to the next step. So ask them before you build the program, what are the barriers to you moving to the next step? And then make a program that specifically addresses those barriers. Not what you think is important, but what is important for them to move down the process. So those are two general things you can use it for.
Yeah, that's really good information. Well, thanks, guys. I really want to say thanks to everybody who joined us for the webinar. Matt did an excellent job. For those of you that have a couple questions there at the end, I'll send them to Matt afterwards and have him get in touch with you so he can get those answered for you. But I just want to respect everybody's time here. So thanks for joining. We're going to send up a follow-up email with that paper that Matt's been talking about, along with a quick survey that if you guys don't mind filling that out and giving us some feedback. We want to make sure that these are as useful to you guys as possible, and we want to get your, we want to make sure that we're covering all the right topics and whatnot. And we do have a podcast coming out here soon before Thanksgiving, so be looking for that. And then we might also have a webinar set up before before the holidays, so also look for that. We'll get a date out on that here within the next week or so. But thanks, Sam, Cyrus, Matt, for putting this all together. I think it went really well, and thanks everybody. Have a great rest of the week.